Welcome to the Geniuses of Copywriting podcast, a peek into the minds and strategies of the world's greatest copywriters, marketers, and persuasion experts. And now, here's your host, Brian Casangina.
Hey there, welcome back to the Geniuses of Copywriting podcast. I'm here with Dan Ferrari, and it's a funny story because it was a while back that Dan and I actually did this recording. I don't know, it's a couple of months ago, 3 months ago.
Yeah,
and then God only knows what happened to that recording. It disappeared somewhere in the tech universe. Something that I have no knowledge or interest in. So
someday we can unearth it and sell it for $197.
Oh yeah, that's my secret plan. The lost Dan Ferrari recording. So I had to twist Dan's arm and pay him $1 million and promise to give him my firstborn son to come back on the show and do over basically all the stuff that he talked about last time, because I'm not quite sure of the details, but I remember that he dropped so many nuggets of gold. That's probably why it sank to the bottom of the ocean, and we haven't been able to find the episode. So thanks for coming back on, Dan.
You got it, man. Hopefully we can relive some of those moments of gold and get some good stuff today too.
Yeah, from what we were talking about a minute ago off air, I think we will. But to go step back a minute, for those who don't know who Dan Ferrari is, Dan used to be on the team at Motley Fool, and he's left there and started his own agency with two other guys, and he's grown that into a pretty successful copywriting agency. So this is not like doing Facebook ads for people. It's doing the actual copy and persuasion, the words that sell. So that's a really interesting thing in itself, Dan. So I'd love to hear more about what you guys are doing there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we started that agency in early 2016. It was me and Aaron Winter, who was my copy chief at the Motley Fool, and then another guy that he knew named Joel Karlinski. So the three of us sort of started that, with Aaron being what you might call the creative director, Joel handling all the operations and management, sort of like accounts for our clients, and then I was the main copywriter. And things quickly took off. Our first big contract was with Agora Financial, because I had a really good relationship with Joe Schrieffer that had gone back a few years, and he really admired the work that Aaron and I had done at the Motley Fool. So that was a pretty natural progression over the first few months of the agency's life to get into that position. And
for sure.
things really grew from there. We're 3.5 years later, Agora Financial is still our biggest client, and in the financial world where you actually give them exclusivity, so we don't work for any other financial clients. But an interesting thing that happened is probably about 1.5 years ago, so maybe kind of like halfway through that trajectory of where we are now, I started saying, we should really be doing stuff outside of financial, because it's interesting. I'm very interested in supplements and health and stuff like that. But more importantly, for financial copywriters, there is a huge risk that they have no control over, which is the state of the stock market, right?
Yeah.
And as the stock market has just continued to go up, almost unbelievably so, over the last few years, it's always like, when's it going to go down? And we thought that it would just be a really intelligent move for us to sort of plant our flag with a lot of those big health clients. So I spent exactly a little diversification, a hedge against potentially, a lot of that financial writing going away or not being as lucrative anymore.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of 2017, 2018, and even a good part of this year really kind of getting in with a lot of those clients. And we've written a bunch of controls for New Market Health and Green Valley at this point, and Organifi. So it's been a pretty successful diversification play, I guess you could say. But I think the real lesson there is just everyone will say to specialize, and I agree with that, right? Especially early on, you have to really kind of nail down a particular market. And when you're coming up as a copywriter, it's really hard to keep track of several different markets and to really learn the in and outs of several different prospective customers. But once you do that, I think the next move is to look into how to essentially do what you just said, which is diversify against things potentially going bad. I mean, maybe that's not specialization outside of or into a different market, but just different types of clients or looking at different people who do different types of traffic buying and funnels or whatever. Like, you know, it goes back to the old Dan Kennedy thing about the danger of the number one.
Yeah, it's the worst number in business.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because if you've got all your eggs in that basket, then you know it can be amazingly lucrative. Like you know, if you're Agora Financial with the stock market going up, you know, it's a lot easier to write those winners. But if there was a huge crash or something, or some other type of really big event that negatively impacted one area of your business, if that's like everything you've got, it's like having one retainer client. You know, it's you lose that one, and then you're back to square one.
Yeah, and you know that I'm still writing mostly financial copy these days, but the beauty of it is if that event that you just mentioned did happen, and Joe came to us and said, you know, we can't pay you guys anymore. There's half a dozen health clients who are literally begging for more work from us because we came in and we did it and it went so well.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of the goal of really looking at your career, even as just a freelancer, as being a business, and how do you protect it and grow it and basically put yourself in the best position to take advantage of various opportunities.
Yeah, so that leads on to what we were just talking about as well, which is you know, expanding business-wise. So let me ask you this: if you're a a freelance copywriter working for yourself, doing all the writing for all of your clients, what do you do when you want to diversify into different areas? I mean, do you learn those new markets? Do you find other writers who can help you, or do you find other writers who can take me down that path for a freelance copywriter wanting to expand what they're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, the story that I just told, I think, has the first step, which when we started the agency, what Aaron did that was really, really smart is he essentially put himself and me as the two primary marketers in the position to do all the marketing. And he did that by hiring Joel as being, you know, the chief operating officer who could really handle a lot of the things that, you know, I don't want to handle as a copywriter. Like, I don't schedule my meetings with the clients. He schedules them for me, and then I just show up and then we have the creative discussion.
Yeah.
Or, you know, he is sitting in with the client and he understands the larger picture and, you know, some of the political things that have to be considered, or some of the things that aren't necessarily on the marketing side that have to be done. And then, you know, he interfaces with the legal department. And at the end of the day, he's the one that collects the money, and then it just shows up in my account. So even just having someone to take on sort of the, I guess that's what you call the operational role of running a freelance business, right? Like it frees up the marketer and the copywriter to do what they're best at. And what I'm saying here is not groundbreaking, right? But it is the way that we executed it, I think, was done really smart, because Joel is a strategic asset, and every dollar that I make is worth so much more because he's behind it. And so it's about hiring someone who understood the business and who understood what was important in the business and is just as important as the copywriters in helping that business grow. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, from my own experience, often freelance copywriters are good at selling themselves and landing the clients and doing the creative side of things. But when it comes to that operational side of things, we have neither the skill nor the desire to master any of that stuff. So that's a really smart hire that you made there.
Yeah, I mean, and the desire is very important too, right? Like,
yeah,
I've been doing this for, I guess, about 7 years now, and I'm still, if you ask me, what am I most passionate about in my day-to-day work, it's sitting down and writing, or, getting deep into a funnel and working on tests, or chiefing a writer. And that's what I'm allowed to do because I don't have to work in all those other areas that, frankly, I'm not very good at anyway. So even if I wanted to do them, it wouldn't be good for the business.
Yeah. That's a good reason why companies hire ad agencies, because like in my case again, I know the basics of Facebook ads, but my implementation of an ad campaign would just not be something that would get results. No matter how much I'd like to actually master that skill, so you got to have both sides of the coin.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, to continue answering your question, the next step that we took, and I think the next step that is very, very helpful for most writers, is to start bringing in junior writers. And there's a lot of different ways that you can work with junior writers. There's a lot of different ways that junior writers can sort of come in and not only help an organization or the writer that they're working for, but also really enhance their own development and accelerate the rate at which they're getting better too. And so happy to dive into some of that as well.
Yeah, for sure, because it's one of the things that I also want to look at too, bringing in different writers to work on projects. So, I mean, do these guys, do you favor Western-based or English-speaking writers? And do you do you pay writers from, less developed parts of the world because they usually charge less, or do you prefer to pay more for a native English speaker?
We don't have any real, I guess, mold when we bring people in. The real requirement for us is that we generally are only looking for people who can work for us in some sort of recurring capacity at some point, right? Yeah. So we're looking for talent that can be developed. And of course, running a business, like, you have to be able to operate that talent at a profit, correct? But what we have found is that there's kind of a few different, call it like molds of where junior writers might be. And depending on where they are in their career and what they've done in the past, like, you can sort of plug them in to different areas. So, if you take someone who's kind of like a very junior level writer, the first thing that you can have them do is essentially be kind of a right-hand man to a lead writer on a project.
Yeah.
Right. And so we've done this with great success in the past, where, say, I'm leading a project and one of the junior writers comes in, helps me with a lot of the research, helps me with the planning. And then potentially, if they're up for it or we think that they're capable, even writing certain sections that are pretty standalone. And so they don't have to have a huge understanding of kind of what's going on at different parts of the promo, but they can write, say, 4 or 5 pages of bonus copy or something like that.
Yeah.
And then they can really assist in the editing process, and in some of the, with a lot of our clients, there's a pretty stringent legal review where more information is requested, things like that.
Yeah.
And then that's a great model for us because if that writer is working with me, they're going to get a share of my royalties.
Yeah.
And so there's a nice monetary incentive for them, and that, you know, the potential for a Dan Ferrari project to make a lot of money is pretty high, frankly, right? And they're getting in on that, and they're also learning, and they're getting paid. So that's been like a really, really good model for us. Another thing that we've done a lot that I think is critical is putting people in short form projects. And the reason for that is that the problem with a long form project, whether it's, you know, writing a full VSL or building out kind of a longer autoresponder series, or even making like a funnel or something like that, is that the return of information is very slow, right? Even if you work very fast, which we do, you're looking at weeks at the fastest to get your data
project back. Yeah,
exactly. And so there's a really high cost to getting data, but data is really, really valuable, especially for a developing writer, because it tells them so much about what's working. It tells them so much about the various triggers that market is responding to. It helps them rapidly iterate their work and their understanding of how to get better, right? And so that requires data. But the best type of data is what I call cheap data, right? So those long form projects, those big projects, that's expensive data because it takes a lot of time, and your time is money, right? Like there's literally a cost attached to people's time. But cheap data is data that comes back very fast because there's not a whole lot that goes into it, right? Like even say kind of your most intense short form project, which might be an advertorial or something like that. Like you could write that in a day, have it running for 2 days, and have the data back on day 4, right? And you immediately have information, and then you could go split test the headline or something like that. And so you're starting to get loads of information very fast. When I was at the Motley Fool, I was writing long form stuff all the time, but the Motley Fool had such a robust data system, and they were always getting data back, and they had a really well run testing operation. And so I was always, you know, sitting down with the traffic guys or the optimization guys and saying, what little tests can I participate in? Like, can I write a bunch of subject lines for you guys? As long as you give me the data back, like I'm happy to take an hour out of my day every day to do that sort of stuff, because it was so valuable to me. And so we always try and give our writers that opportunity too. And I think it's just a wise way to really bring someone into a market or a business and have them understand the various draws of different products, different offers, and how those things connect with kind of like the core customer that their real job is to get to know very, very, very well.
And how do you move writers up through whatever system you have? You know, do you move them up to longer form copy once they prove themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think the goal for any writer who we hire, or really, you know, any business would hire, is eventually you want to get them to the place where they're mostly independent. And if there's a chief in place, really what that means is like a lot of the ideas and stuff, they'll come from the chief, right? A lot of kind of the direction. But if I'm the chief and I say, here's our idea, here's the 5 most important things you need to know about it, and like here's kind of the concept that I have, the goal is to get the person to be able to execute on that pretty fast, or pretty independently, I should say, fast and independently. Because those are the 2 costs to the business. Is if they can't do it independently, they need a lot of oversight. That's a cost. And if they're taking so much time, that's also a cost. So it's a kind of about looking at how much faith you have that a writer can do that. And honestly, like it doesn't have to be, they don't have to be an A-list writer to get to that level. The beautiful thing about working in sort of the internet marketing world is that 80% is usually good enough.
Yeah.
And definitely good enough to get out and to get the data back. And so if we have confidence that a writer can be independent enough to really basically take a good swing, we'll put them in and we'll see what happens, essentially. Because, this is something that I think you and I talked about on the Lost Recordings, is that really the name of this game, it all comes down to finding leverage points. Direct response businesses are really businesses that are in search of finding leverage. And by that, I mean, of the 10 next promotions, which one's going to be the one that is the 80-20 producer?
Yeah.
And so really the only way to do that is to just keep taking those swings. And so it really becomes kind of a game of production and volume and speed in some regards, right? Like, I'm not advocating to just put anything out there extremely low quality and, no due diligence behind it. But what I am advocating against is this sort of level of perfection that I see kind of running rampant in the industry, especially with copywriters. I think copywriters probably there's some sort of psychological basis for copywriters having a little bit of a perfectionism bias, kind of across the board. The ones I make,
the ones I make, baby. Yeah.
Exactly. You get really attached to it.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I'm always trying to work with myself and with the writers who I'm chiefing and coaching is that you cannot get attached to that baby. The faster you can do it, the faster you can get it to that 80% quality level, the better it is for everyone involved. The better it is for the writer, because they're going to naturally have more projects out there. They're going to make more money. And what's good for the writer is almost always good for the client. Or good for the business that they're working in-house for.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those things where it's incredibly painful sometimes to look at your writing and say, like, this is not what I think it should be, or something doesn't feel right. But the discipline to keep going in that situation is actually a big part of what I do with some of the writers that I work with, is just say, like, keep going. You don't need to worry about this. I'll worry about that later if we have to, right? That's kind of the chief's job, is to tell them that it will get handled, but their job is to just keep writing.
Yeah. Do you find they have all different sorts of learning curves? Do some learn really quick and get faster really quick, while others might be slower? But do you find the ones that are slower, do you find they often tend to be worth it? Or is speed of learning a good indicator of how good they are?
I have not found any pattern in that regard. The one pattern that I can say I've noticed over and over again is that there are plateaus.
Yeah.
Pretty much every writer I've ever worked with will have a development curve that, it goes up and to the right for a little bit of time, and then it flattens out, and then it goes up and to the right for a little bit of time. And to me, what has always sort of been an indicator of maybe how much future potential they have is what happens for them to break out of those plateaus. Almost inevitably, breaking out of those plateaus is a consequence of having a major breakthrough, or sort of a major realization about what makes direct response work, or what makes copywriting work.
And this is like over and above what you find in books and courses. What kind of breakthroughs are we talking about here?
Well, I think it's what you would find in a book and a course, but really being able to internalize it and execute on it, and like truly understand what it means. Right. So I'll give you an example that I think is actually a fairly advanced example. So, you get a book or a course on copywriting, and pretty much across the board, this book or course is going to say, oh, what you are in the business of doing is persuading someone via tapping into their emotions, right? Getting into their emotions. And what I don't think people really quite grasp at first is that that's incredibly hard. That is a really high level skill. And there's actually probably several different, call it, levels at which you can do it, right?
Mm.
So here's where one of those breakthroughs might happen is like in the first level of 2 of being able to quote unquote play on someone's emotions with your copy. You're not really truly understanding what's going on emotionally with that person or what you can say. You're just kind of like mimicking what you know would work, right?
Yeah.
Kind of the surface level things that you can tap into to sort of hit on whatever emotional state that they're in.
Yeah.
But the real breakthrough, so you might plateau on that level of understanding for a few months, right? And it will work for you. Then somehow, some way you have this breakthrough and you say, oh, I see it so much deeper now. I understand that the reason that person cares about their weight, or the reason that person cares about their health, or the reason that person cares about their finances isn't just those surface level things that I've been talking to them about, which are important, but it's actually goes, 50 meters deeper than that. And there's so much more that I can do to really bring this copy to life. That's the kind of breakthrough that, you know what's there, but it just sort of takes time to internalize it and to really understand it. And so to go back to your original question, I think what I've noticed is that the best writers tend to have those breakthroughs happen more profoundly, or not necessarily even faster, but it's when it happens, it's like a light bulb or a switch goes off. It's almost like it's like one promo to the next, you can notice that something deeply profound has happened to this person's copy. And I've seen that happen, time and time again. And almost inevitably, the writers who I've seen that happen with have just continued to get better and continued to do better things for their clients and the businesses that they're working for.
So that's really interesting because there's obviously no way to really predict how somebody will go until they actually keep working and you either see them improve or not. So
yeah, I mean, one thing that I can say to that is I think there is a certain amount of stubbornness that leads to success in this business.
Yeah, I think you have to.
Most of the writers that I've seen have breakthroughs like that. The breakthrough didn't come because they were, twiddling their thumbs around. It came because they were really applying themselves to the craft.
Yeah.
And I don't mean you have to do that for 10 hours a day or whatever, but these people who I've noticed this happen with, including myself, they just tend to be very, very deep thinkers, very passionate about the art of copywriting, and very in tune with kind of the concept that I really enjoy about my career, which is that I don't think that there's an end destination. I think copywriting is a journey. I think it's almost a never ending hole that you can go down to keep learning, to keep getting better. And, I don't do it that out of obsession or compulsion. I do it because I enjoy it. And that joy of just continually finding new stuff to make myself better. Like I said, I've been doing this for 7 years and I think I still get better every year. So I'm a little biased, but when I look at writers, that's the kind of thing that really screams out to me as being kind of that indicator of this is someone who's going to have those breakthroughs.
Yeah. And are you bullish on like providing all the resources and stuff that people need to learn the stuff at a deeper level?
I have, I guess, a moderate amount of respect for various, formalized ways of education, right? But the caveat I will say is I think a lot of that is only worthwhile if you're working consistently at applying it, right? You have to be writing and you have to be thinking deeply about how those things work. And, as someone who's spent most of my copywriting career in in sort of a copywriting team of some form, right? In-house at the Motley Fool or as part of this agency, I will say that I think collaboration with a chief is, 100 times more valuable than anything else. Just getting that direct feedback from somebody who not only is a master at the craft, but is basically a master at understanding whatever the particular project or business or offer or prospect that you're working towards converting. That is worth 1 hour with a person like that is worth 100 watching videos, courses and stuff like that. But I've always been a fan of consuming that sort of information and then using my own projects and my own work with Aaron, who still chiefs my work to this day, to really integrate it and to gain that understanding. And that's where my breakthroughs have come from, is when I can sort of take pieces from the more formalized education and then sit down and say, oh, that's how it applies to this thing that's in front of me right now.
Yeah, interesting.
And then that happens, like once you learn something like that, it doesn't go away. You don't forget how to do it. And so then you have sort of this asset that's continuing to help you do better and to write better and to make more money for whatever project you are on for the rest of your career.
Yeah. So it really becomes like a mentor protege coaching kind of relationship between the copy chief and the writers underneath him.
Yeah, and I think what I've really enjoyed about sort of watching the industry evolve over the last few years is I think that on both sides, both from the writer standpoint and the business chiefing standpoint, what people are understanding is that the best relationships are the deep, long-term relationships, right? We've had a lot of success because we've invested in developing our writers so that they can get to that point of independence that we talked about and that you asked me about.
Yeah.
The model of hiring someone one-off, I don't have a problem with it, but I think it needs to be done in a very specific circumstance, right? So when I talk to businesses who say, I don't know if I should be hiring an in-house writer and developing them. I don't know if that should be a junior person or should I hire a senior person who comes in and is independent, or should I just be hiring freelancers to like work on our biggest projects? What I tell them is that it's actually like a mixture of all of those things, right? So you have the ideal thing in my mind is you have kind of your in-house team, which may be a junior and a senior, or at least some sort of mix of people who are developed and developing.
Yeah.
And then you kind of get, you get your best practices in place. There's a certain model that works for you. Your promos tend to kind of have that particular in-house style to them. And then when you really need to flip the apple cart open and have just an injection of new creativity, different creativity, an injection of a different style, that's when you go and you find that A-lister who's going to charge 30 grand or whatever. And you bring them in to, take on hopefully a marquee project, but also to show you in an entirely different way to do that project. And that will actually help because the in-house team will see how that's being executed. They'll see what's working, what's not working, and it'll just add a whole nother dimension to what they're working on. But, to answer your question, I think it really, at this kind of stage in the evolution of direct response, and it's just very intense and it moves fast. And I think being willing to kind of have those long-term relationships that are formed a little bit less on short-term outcomes and are formed more on what you might even call a long-term partnership in some way. That's really where I think a lot of the both providers and the companies that are hiring them should be going. And I've seen a lot of that, and people, the reason I can talk about so much of this pretty frankly is that I've had this discussion with dozens of businesses at this point who don't know how to hire or develop or don't know what to look for. And the fact that they're coming around and asking tells me that, that realization is kind of hitting the market. And I think that it only is good for everybody.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, you've given us some real good insights into running a business like that. So no, the most freelance copywriters, in my experience, they're happy with what they're doing, but they have that dream of like expanding into a full at least a model of success like yours, even if they're not thinking agency, if they're not thinking growing a huge team. There's they can only write so much. This is why stuff like this is really interesting to them.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it doesn't have to be an agency. Even just bringing one person on, to slowly develop, to take some of the workload, and then essentially grow into kind of a right-hand writer. That is incredibly valuable. And there's plenty of examples of essentially 2-person teams doing great things.
Yeah, and going by Agora's model, there's always upsides to hiring writers. The rule Agora lives by is that the more copywriters they hire, the more money they make.
Yeah, and that goes back, to this principle of kind of finding the leverage points, right? In that, the more copy that's coming out of any particular shop, the more likely they are to sort of stumble upon that $1 million idea, or in Agora's case, the 10 or $20 million idea. It really comes down to that in sort of everything that we've talked about today. It's just, how do we get as much out of our writers as possible, or as a writer, how do I get as much out of myself as possible? And like I said, I'm the last person who's going to advocate sitting in front of a computer for 12 hours a day. So that's not what I mean by that statement, but it's about how making every hour and every project count the most and getting them done in an efficient way without having that perfectionism attached to it.
Yeah, that's the key to it. Perfectionism becomes procrastination, and you're just like waiting around for the perfect scenario, which never comes, and then all of a sudden everyone else is overtaking you, and you're right back where you started.
Well, yeah, and to bring things full circle with what you just said, like, that is the beauty of, I think, why Agora's copywriting system has worked and why Agora has continued to grow every year, is because they instill a certain level of that into their writers. And I can contrast that with plenty of businesses I know that they never get into that mindset of, we're building a productive copy team. And so they spend too long on promos with their writers. They give their developing writers too much leeway in terms of long deadlines, or requiring every revision to be 100% word edited by the chief, even for a junior writer, which that's a long undertaking, is to really take a junior writer and bring their project into that sort of perfect realm. And I've seen plenty of businesses that just stall because they just don't do it fast enough. Their copy team isn't built to grow. Built to grow the business, I should say.
Yeah. That's another really interesting aspect that we're probably going to have to touch on that next time I have you on the show, because I'm really interested in hearing more about this, as well as the listeners. So how can they, in the meantime, how can they find out more about this and follow you guys and what you're doing?
Yeah, the best way is to get on my email list. I don't email incredibly often, but I try and shoot out a few things a month, and they tend to be longer form, kind of high level treatments of some of the stuff like we've talked about today. So the best place for that is ferrarimedia.com. There's just a simple opt-in there.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Yeah. I highly recommend it. Anyone listening to this podcast, definitely go there and check it out, because Dan's one of the copywriters that I follow online, and while he's doesn't seek the limelight as much as some of the other writers, he's in the trenches doing this stuff like you've just been listening to. I'll put that link also on the page at geniusesofcopywriting.com. But for anyone listening on iTunes or whatever, ferrarimedia.com, go and sign up there. From what I've seen of Dan's emails, there's some of the best out there. It's one of the few lists that I value being on. I actually open the emails and everything. So
thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, it's definitely worthwhile. So ferrarimedia.com, go and sign up there and stay in touch with Dan. He is a true genius of copywriting. So thanks for coming on. I appreciate your time.
Thanks. It's been a blast. Appreciate it.
No problems. We'll have to do this again soon.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks, man.
Thank you for listening to Geniuses of Copywriting with Brian Casangina. To get the full transcript and all the resources mentioned on today's show, go to www.geniusesofcopywriting.com now.